This is EconWorks. Today's episode: how a failed Silicon Valley acquisition foreshadowed today's battles over AI, platforms, and digital gatekeepers.
So picture this. It is late 2010, and a hyper-growth startup just walked away from a $6 billion buyout offer.
Which is just, an unfathomable amount of money, especially back then.
Right. And the crazy part is, they didn't even think the offer was too low.
No, they didn't.
And they didn't hate the buyer, which, by the way, happened to be Google.
Yeah, Google was practically throwing cash at them.
Exactly. And they didn't have some secret better offer waiting in the wings either. They rejected this absolute mountain of cash because they were absolutely terrified of a waiting room.
Which sounds completely irrational on the surface. Turning down $6 billion because of a waiting room.
It sounds insane.
It does. But in the high-stakes ecosystem of tech acquisitions, stepping into a regulatory waiting room can literally dismantle a company from the inside out.
Even before a single judge makes a ruling.
Exactly. Before the gavel even drops, the company is bleeding out.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We have a very specific mission today for you. We are exploring a single, incredibly detailed source. It's an EconWorks blog post titled "The Deal Google Couldn't Close." And we're looking at its underlying data, too.
There is so much packed into this analysis.
There really is. We are going to extract the surprising mechanics behind one of the most mythologized failed acquisitions in Silicon Valley history. Because, weirdly enough, the exact reasons this 2010 deal fell apart, they secretly predicted the regulatory reality governing the apps and platforms you and I use today.
Yeah, the fallout from this single unclosed deal essentially became the blueprint for modern digital antitrust law.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. The rules of the game fundamentally changed because of what happened right here.
Okay, so let's unpack this. To really understand this, we have to travel back to the internet landscape of late 2010. Google offers a staggering $6 billion to acquire a daily deals startup called Groupon.
To be precise, it was roughly $5.3 billion in cash, plus earnouts.
Right, earnouts. Meaning the founders would only unlock the remaining, hundreds of millions if the company hit specific performance metrics after the merger.
Correct. But even so, $6 billion was an astronomical valuation back then.
So why was Google willing to throw that kind of money at a company that basically just sent out email coupons?
Well, Google was trying to solve a massive blind spot. In 2010, they were the undisputed king of desktop search advertising.
Right. They knew exactly what people were looking for online.
Exactly. But the holy grail for a tech giant is building what they call a closed-loop data ecosystem.
A closed loop. Okay, break that down for me.
So they needed to connect a user's digital search to an actual physical purchase in the real world. They needed local advertising, a mobile commerce presence, and merchant transaction data.
Okay, so if I search for a pizza place on Google, they wanted to track not just that I clicked the link, but that I actually walked into the pizzeria on Main Street and, spent $20.
That is the closed loop. That's exactly it. And Groupon, at that exact moment, was the fastest-growing consumer internet company on the planet.
Because they were everywhere.
They were. Their model connected massive email lists of local consumers with heavy discounts at physical businesses. Spas, restaurants, yoga studios.
So for Google, buying Groupon wasn't really about the coupons at all.
Not at all. It was about buying a direct, pre-built pathway into local offline commerce.
And Google wanted this so badly, they practically offered a cash insurance policy to get it done.
Yeah, the details of the offer are pretty staggering.
According to the EconWorks analysis, Google included an unusually massive reverse breakup fee of around $800 million.
That is huge.
It's massive. They're essentially telling Groupon, hey, if European or U.S. regulators block this merger, we will just hand you $800 billion for the inconvenience.
That level of financial downside protection is wild. It should have erased any anxiety the founders had.
You would think. But the financial risk was mitigated, sure. The operational risk, though, that was what terrified Groupon's leadership.
Right. They weren't necessarily afraid of regulators ultimately blocking the deal. They were afraid of the timeline.
The dreaded waiting room.
Exactly. Regulators in Europe and the U.S. were just starting to wake up to Google's search dominance. A merger of this size was guaranteed to trigger deep scrutiny.
And the internal fear at Groupon was that an investigation would drag on for 12 to 18 months.
Which brings us to the mechanics of that waiting room. I think a lot of people assume that when a company is under regulatory review, they just keep doing what they were doing.
Right, just business as usual.
But operating a hypergrowth startup isn't like driving a car where you can just idle at a red light.
No, it's more like trying to build a high-speed train while it's hurtling down the tracks.
That's a great way to put it.
If a regulator blows the whistle and forces you to pause major strategic moves for an 18-month inspection, you don't just idle. The engine overheats, and the entire project derails.
The internal mechanics of a frozen startup are brutal. During a massive merger review, your executive team is no longer focused on product innovation.
They're trapped in conference rooms.
Right. They are trapped in endless meetings with antitrust lawyers. You often have to institute code freezes to ensure you aren't changing the fundamental product that regulators are evaluating.
And while your executives are in court and your product is frozen, what happens? Your top engineering talent gets bored and leaves.
The talent drain is immediate. Furthermore, the EconWorks data maps out exactly how this operational paralysis translates to the market. They reference a chart, Figure 2, about the cost of regulatory delay.
What does this say?
When you lock a company in regulatory delay jail, the downstream effect is catastrophic market share loss. Groupon's underlying business had virtually no barrier to entry.
Because they were essentially just sending localized emails.
Exactly. The operational delay would give incredibly well-funded clones 18 months to completely flood the market, poach merchants, and replicate the model.
So the delay itself is the weapon. It's not even about the final legal verdict. The sheer timeline of the process destroys the momentum of a company that relies entirely on speed.
And that structural threat, that fear of the timeline, sparked a philosophical civil war inside Groupon's boardroom.
Let's talk about that boardroom tension, because the divide here is fascinating to me.
It really is. You have two completely different views of reality.
Right. On one side, you have these seasoned investors and directors who look at Groupon and realize a very uncomfortable truth.
Which is that they have no actual technological moat.
Exactly. There is no proprietary algorithm or deep tech infrastructure protecting them. To this group, taking Google's billions is a miraculous, de-risked exit.
You hand the keys to a tech titan, you take the cash, and you let Google's army of lawyers worry about the copycats.
A completely rational view of a highly volatile business model.
Very rational. But the other faction, led by CEO Andrew Mason and Chairman Eric Lefkofsky, saw an entirely different reality.
What were they seeing?
Well, Mason was deeply protective of their corporate culture and independence. And Lefkofsky, who was pushing hard for a standalone public offering, believed the public markets would value Groupon substantially higher than $6 billion.
They felt they had barely scratched the surface of global expansion.
Right. They thought they were building the next Amazon, just for local commerce.
I find myself wanting to push back on the founder's logic here, though. I mean, we can talk about the fear of regulatory delay, but wasn't a massive part of this just executive hubris?
Oh, hubris definitely played a measurable role.
By turning down Google's ecosystem and their $800 million safety net, Groupon essentially committed to a high-wire act without a net. They assumed their daily deals model was an invincible force of nature.
Completely ignoring the fact that anyone with an email server could and did launch a clone in 30 days.
Right.
Rejecting that offer was an all-in wager on their own invincibility. The regulatory uncertainty provided a very real strategic justification, but it became deeply intertwined with these broader egos and disagreements about valuation.
And, spoiler alert, the founders won the argument.
They did. The board chose independence, walked away from Google, and set the stage for their own IPO in late 2011.
But taking the solo path when you lack a deep technological moat means you are suddenly stepping out into the public markets without any shelter.
And those public markets put Groupon's internal machinery under a microscopic and, frankly, unforgiving light.
Initially, though, it appeared Mason and Lefkofsky had made the genius play.
Yeah, the timeline in the source notes that when Groupon went public in November 2011, it was an absolute blockbuster.
They were valued at over $12 billion.
And their market cap shortly peaked past $16 billion. On paper, they had more than doubled the value Google had offered just a year prior.
But, and there's always a but, the public market doesn't just look at user growth. Eventually, they audit the underlying math.
And Groupon's math was, well, creative.
Highly creative. Groupon was relying on a fiercely aggressive, non-GAAP accounting metric to sell their story.
Non-GAAP, basically meaning accounting rules a company invents to highlight their most flattering angles.
Right, like an Instagram filter for your finances.
Groupon called their metric ACSOI, which stands for Adjusted Consolidated Segment Operating Income.
It is a notorious acronym in financial history.
It really is. I mean, to understand how absurd ACSOI was to the listener, it's essentially a metric that says, look how incredibly profitable we are as long as you completely ignore the astronomical amount of money we are forced to spend on marketing just to acquire our customers.
Yeah, which is their biggest expense.
Exactly. It would be like me running a lemonade stand and telling investors I have a wildly profitable business model, provided you don't count the cost of the lemons, the sugar, the cups, and the signs.
The Securities and Exchange Commission certainly shared your view on that lemonade stand.
I bet they did.
The source material highlights the aggressive pushback from the SEC, which forced Groupon to abandon that metric entirely. But the regulatory corrections didn't stop at just marketing expenses, did they?
No, they didn't. The most devastating blow came down to how Groupon fundamentally recorded its revenue. This is outlined in the source's Figure 3, the gross versus net revenue smackdown.
Let's get into that. The illusion of Groupon's immense scale was built entirely on how they logged a transaction.
Prior to the SEC intervention, Groupon was reporting the full face value of the vouchers sold as their own revenue.
So if a customer bought a $100 voucher for a local massage, Groupon recorded $100 in gross revenue on their books.
Exactly. But the reality was, Groupon didn't keep that money. They had to remit half of it, $50, back to the local spa. They were only keeping a $50 commission.
That's insane. It's like if Visa or MasterCard tried to claim the entire $1,000 price of the television you just bought as their corporate revenue.
Simply because they processed the transaction.
Right, rather than just claiming the $30 swipe fee they actually keep.
The SEC viewed Groupon exactly that way. They ruled that Groupon was merely a broker acting as an agent for these local businesses, not the primary obliger of the services.
So they were forced to report only the net revenue, the portion they actually retained.
Yes. And overnight, this accounting restatement effectively sliced their perceived top-line revenue in half.
Just wiped it out. The sheer size of the company vanished. And as the accounting illusions faded, the fundamental flaws in the actual business model were exposed.
The underlying unit economics were bleeding. The mechanics of the daily deal model were inherently flawed for the merchants.
Because local businesses were offering these deep discounts, hoping to acquire loyal, repeat customers.
But that's not what happened. Instead, they were flooded with one-time deal hunters who bought the discounted service, overwhelmed the staff, and never returned.
So the merchants were taking steep financial losses just to participate.
Right. So merchant retention plummets, customer fatigue sets in, and those clones we talked about earlier have now fully saturated the market.
The compounding effect was fatal to their valuation. Combined with additional internal control scandals, Groupon eventually lost over 90% of its peak market value.
The standalone path, stripped of Google's infrastructure and scrutinized by public regulators, proved to be exactly the fatal gamble it appeared to be.
Which is a tragic arc for the company itself. But here is where this gets really interesting for us today. While Groupon's solo journey ended in a massive crash, the original reason they rejected Google in 2010, that fear of how antitrust regulators view dominant tech giants buying startups, it secretly laid the groundwork for the modern internet.
It really did. The EconWorks analysis frames the Google Groupon saga as patient zero for a massive shift in legal theory.
How so?
It maps out the transition from what antitrust lawyers call the consumer welfare standard to the modern focus on the nascent competitor. This is detailed in their Figure 4.
Okay, so how did the rules of the game actually change between 2010 and today?
Well, in 2010, antitrust scrutiny was overwhelmingly focused on immediate price effects, regulators evaluating a merger as a highly specific question. If company A buys company B, will the price of the product go up for the consumer tomorrow?
And because Google offered free search and Groupon offered heavily discounted deals, blocking the merger under that old consumer welfare standard was incredibly difficult.
Exactly. The immediate impact on a consumer's wallet seemed entirely beneficial.
But regulators eventually realized that waiting for a company to raise prices or waiting for a startup to grow large enough to become a direct threat to a monopoly meant they were always too late.
Yes, because by the time the threat was obvious, the tech giant had already used its massive network effects and data advantages to neutralize them.
So fast forward to the 2023 FTC and DOJ merger guidelines. The framework has been completely rewritten, hasn't it?
Completely. Regulators are no longer just looking at short-term price tags. They are focused on ecosystem entrenchment.
Ecosystem entrenchment.
Yeah, they actively investigate whether dominant digital gatekeepers are acquiring emerging threats, these nascent competitors, to absorb them into their ecosystem before they can mature into independent rivals.
Even if this startup isn't a direct competitor today.
Correct. I mean, in 2010, an email coupon company wasn't a direct rival to a search engine.
Right.
But Groupon represented a vital emerging wedge into local mobile commerce. Google wanted it to fortify its own ecosystem. Under today's guidelines, regulators view those adjacent acquisitions with deep suspicion.
Aiming to preserve independent pathways for innovation.
Exactly.
I want to connect this directly to the listener's world right now. Think about your favorite niche app. Maybe a brilliant new scheduling tool or a unique local marketplace you use all the time.
Yeah, we all have those apps.
Right. And the reason that app hasn't been bought by Apple and seamlessly integrated into iOS or bought by Amazon and rolled into Prime might not be because those giants don't want it. It might be because their legal teams won't let them touch it.
And that new reality introduces a massive unresolved tension, which the source material heavily critiques.
What's the critique?
This raises an important question. If regulators aggressively block these acquisitions to protect future competition, do they inadvertently create kill zones?
Kill zones. The mechanics of that phrase are fascinating. Walk us through how a regulatory posture actually kills a startup's funding.
It comes down to the math of venture capital. VCs fund risky startups knowing most will fail, relying on one or two massive successes to pay for the rest.
Right, the unicorn model.
Exactly. And that success almost always relies on a liquidity event, usually being acquired by a larger tech company.
So if a VC knows that Apple, Amazon, or Google cannot legally acquire a startup in a specific sector because regulators will tie the deal up in a multi-year antitrust lawsuit.
The exit path vanishes.
And if the exit path vanishes, the VC doesn't write the check in the first place.
Exactly the issue. The seed funding dries up, the talent goes elsewhere, the startup dies in the crib.
Wow.
The critics of the new FTC guidelines argue that by trying to protect hypothetical future competition, regulators might accidentally choke off the very funding required to build innovative competitors today.
You are weighing speculative future harms. The idea that this tiny startup might become a dangerous monopoly in 15 years against the very real, immediate efficiencies of Google having better local transaction data for its users tomorrow.
And this loops right back to the power of the waiting room. The Groupon story proves that a government agency doesn't even need to formally sue to block a merger.
Right. The threat is enough.
The mere threat of a 12 to 18-month operational delay alters the calculus for founders, venture capitalists, and the tech giants themselves.
The legal process itself becomes the market force, which makes the final chapter of this deep dive almost unbelievably ironic. Let's fast forward to 2026. Look at where the key players from that 2010 boardroom battle are operating today.
It is quite the update. Groupon is currently a heavily restructured, significantly smaller public entity. They're focusing on a much narrower slice of local digital vouchers.
And Alphabet, on the other hand, expanded its digital ecosystem to a scale that regulators in 2010 couldn't have fully comprehended.
But the leadership of Groupon didn't just fade away, did they?
No, they didn't. CEO Andrew Mason founded Descript, which has become a highly influential AI-powered audio and video platform.
And Chairman Eric Lefkofsky launched Tempus AI, a massive data and precision medicine company.
Both of them move directly into the heart of artificial intelligence and cloud infrastructure.
What's fascinating here is the profound irony. The distribution of AI models and the dominance of cloud computing infrastructure today mirror the exact dynamics of search dominance in 2010.
They are building in the exact markets where modern nascent competitor theories are being most aggressively applied by global regulators.
The debates they inadvertently sparked by walking away from Google are now the central regulatory pillars governing the AI ecosystems they currently operate in.
It's like they can't escape it.
They really can't. The scrutiny over how large language models are integrated into existing tech platforms is a direct descendant of the scrutiny over Google acquiring local commerce data.
It is a brilliant full-circle moment. We started by looking at a $6 billion deal over email coupons and ended up mapping the DNA of modern antitrust strategy.
It really shows how interconnected all of this tech history is.
To synthesize everything we've pulled from this EconWorks analysis, the legacy of the deal Google couldn't close isn't just a cautionary tale about non-GAAP accounting or the lack of a technological moat.
No, the deeper lesson is that the machinery of antitrust review is a potent, independent force.
The timeline of regulation can starve hypergrowth, redirect capital, and rewrite entire industries long before a judge ever enters a courtroom.
That regulatory friction is no longer just a legal hurdle. It is a core variable that dictates innovation strategy.
If the mere threat of sitting in a 12-month regulatory delay was enough to kill a massive merger and alter the trajectory of local commerce over a decade ago, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
It's a big one.
When you look at the landscape of technology today, are our modern, aggressive antitrust laws actually protecting the next generation of independent startups? Or, by threatening years of delay, are they just creating a brutal environment where only the most deeply entrenched, massively funded corporate giants can afford to survive the waiting room?
Something to think about next time you download a new app.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the unseen forces shaping our digital world, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Econ Works. The goal of this series is to move beyond the surface-level descriptions of how markets work and start looking at the actual architecture of competition. We'll be back soon with another look at where the law and economics meet the market. For the full technical analysis and more from this series, visit us at econworks.com. If you found today's breakdown valuable, please subscribe and share the show. It helps us keep the analysis independent. From all of us here at Econ Works, thanks for listening.